The conference room door slammed open, and she walked in the CEO's wife like she owned the entire building. A thin folder dropped onto my desk with these cold words, "Effective immediately. HR will handle the rest." 2 days before $98,000 would hit my account. 2 days before our $320 million IPO launch. But what she didn't know, her ruthless decision had just pulled the final safety pin. I didn't need to scream. I only needed to wait for the clock to run down. My name is Natalie Rhodes, 38 years old, and until 10 minutes ago, I was the senior systems architect at Halcyon Technologies. The termination letter still sat on my desk, Victoria Lane's signature bleeding across the bottom like a wound. 2 security guards flanked my office door, waiting to escort me out like some common criminal. "You have 15 minutes to clear your personal belongings," Victoria said, her manicured nails tapping against her phone screen. She didn't even look at me. "Nothing proprietary leaves this building." I wanted to laugh. Proprietary? I built their proprietary systems from scratch. Every line of encryption, every security protocol, every piece of infrastructure that would make their IPO possible. I wrote it with these hands during countless nights when Victoria was probably at charity galas spending company money. "May I ask why?" I kept my voice steady, professional, inside, my pulse hammered against my ribs. She finally looked up, those cold blue eyes meeting mine. "Restructuring. Your position has become redundant." Redundant? 48 hours before my annual bonus would trigger, $98,000 that I'd already earned through blood and sweat, through 17-hour days and sacrificed weekends. The timing wasn't coincidental. Victoria had been circling me like a shark ever since the IPO announcement. What she didn't know, what she couldn't possibly know, was that my bonus wasn't just money. It was a trigger clause buried deep in the founding documents, something our late founder Ethan Cross had insisted on years ago. The moment that bonus hit my account, full intellectual property rights to our core encryption codebase would transfer to me. Not partial rights, not licensing, complete ownership. Ethan had called it insurance. "If they ever betray you, Natalie," he'd said over bourbon in his office one late night, "this will be your vindication." I'd thought he was paranoid. Now, standing in my office with security guards watching my every move, I understood his foresight. Victoria strutted around my desk, examining my workspace like she was already redecorating. "The IPO launches in 48 hours. We need team players who understand the vision moving forward." And I don't understand the vision. I couldn't keep the edge from my voice. "I built the platform you're taking public." "You built parts of it," she corrected, her smile sharp as glass. "Under company direction, as the employee." Employee, not architect, not the person who'd saved this company from 3 major security breaches, not the one who'd rewritten their entire backend when the original system crashed 6 months before our first major client presentation. I packed my personal items slowly, methodically. A photo from the company's early days, just 12 of us in a basement office. My coffee mug, chipped from when I dropped it during an all-nighter 3 years ago. The succulent my team had given me last Christmas. Normal things. Nothing that would hint at what was about to happen. Victoria watched me pack with satisfaction painted across her face. She thought she'd won. Removed the last obstacle between her and complete control of the IPO narrative. She'd been telling investors for months that the company's success was due to her strategic interventions, conveniently forgetting that she'd only married into this company 2 years ago. "Your company laptop and access badges." She held out her hand. I placed them on the desk, not in her palm, petty, perhaps, but I was done making things easy for her. "All your passwords will be reset within the hour," she continued. "If you attempt to access any company systems, our legal team will pursue appropriate action." "Of course," I replied, allowing myself a small smile. I wouldn't dream of it. Because I didn't need to access anything. Everything I needed was already in motion. Had been since Ethan signed those papers a decade ago. A dead man's switch, waiting for the right moment to flip. Victoria had just pulled the trigger herself by denying me that bonus. In 48 hours, when the payment didn't process, when the employment termination nullified my compensation, the ownership clause would activate automatically. No hacking required, no illegal access, just contract law, executing exactly as written. The security guards escorted me through the building I'd helped design, past the server room I'd configured, through the lobby where I'd celebrated our first $1 million contract. My colleagues avoided eye contact, some looking guilty, others confused. The news hadn't spread yet, but it would. Victoria would make sure everyone knew she'd streamlined operations just in time for the IPO. At the building entrance, one guard handed me a box with my belongings. "Sorry about this, Ms. Rhodes," he whispered. Marcus had been here almost as long as I had. "Not your fault, Marcus," I said, taking the box. "See you around?" He looked confused. I wouldn't be coming back, after all. But he would understand soon enough. They all would. As I walked to my car, I felt the weight of the USB drive in my pocket. Empty. Just a decoy I'd left obviously in my desk drawer for them to find and panic over. The real backup. The complete documentation of every system, every protocol, every piece of code that lived in biometric encrypted storage that only I could access. 48 hours until Victoria's perfect IPO turned to ash. 48 hours until she learned that firing me wasn't just wrong, it was the $320 million mistake that would define her legacy. I didn't need to destroy anything. I just needed to wait for the clock to run down and watch gravity do its work. The memory surfaced with perfect clarity, like code compiling in my mind. 10 years ago, almost to the day, Ethan had invited me to dinner at his private club downtown, the kind of place where membership required old money and older connections. I'd felt out of place in my department store dress among the crystal chandeliers and oil paintings of dead industrialists. "Natalie," he'd said over aged whiskey I couldn't appreciate back then, "I need to tell you something, off the record. No lawyers, no witnesses, just us." I'd leaned forward, expecting news about acquisition offers or maybe his retirement plans. Instead, he'd pulled out a manila folder, worn at the edges from handling. "I'm dying," he said simply. "Not today, not tomorrow, but sooner than I'd like. The doctors give me 2 years, maybe 3 if I'm lucky." The whiskey had turned to ash in my mouth. "Ethan, Listen," he'd interrupted, his voice steady despite the weight of his words. "I built this company, but you're its beating heart. Every line of code that matters has your fingerprints on it. The problem is, when I'm gone, the vultures will circle. My son doesn't understand technology. The board only sees dollar signs, and whoever they bring in to replace me." He trailed off, swirling his whiskey. "They won't value what you've built." I'd finished for him. "They'll value it," he'd corrected. "They just won't value you. There's a difference. Your code will make them millions, maybe billions eventually, but you're just an employee to them, replaceable, expendable." That word expendable had hung between us like a prophecy. "So I've done something," he'd continued, sliding the folder across the mahogany table. "Call it insurance, call it justice, call it an old man's attempt to protect the future from the past's mistakes." Inside the folder were amended incorporation documents, addendums to the intellectual property assignments, and most importantly, a clause so elegantly hidden in subsection 47B of the employee compensation structure that no lawyer would think to look for it during due diligence. "Your annual bonus," Ethan had explained, "isn't just compensation, it's a trigger. Every year you receive it. You're technically reassigning your IP rights to the company, but if that bonus doesn't get paid, if your employment is terminated within 72 hours of the payment date, the assignment reverses, completely, irrevocably." I'd stared at the papers, trying to process the implications. Is that even legal? I had the best IP lawyer in Seattle write it. Cost me personally $200,000 to make it bulletproof. It's not just legal, it's beautiful. Hidden in plain sight. Using standard language that looks routine unless you know what you're looking for. "Why?" I'd asked. "Why would you do this?" Ethan had leaned back, suddenly looking every one of his 70 years. "Because I know what happens to companies when founders die. I've watched it happen to my friends' legacies. The MBAs come in with their spreadsheets and their optimization strategies. They cut costs, juice the numbers, package everything for a sale or IPO, and the people who actually built something meaningful, they get pushed out right before the payday." He'd been describing Victoria before Victoria even existed in our world. "But they need my code," I'd protested. "They wouldn't dare." "They'll dare," Ethan had said firmly. They'll convince themselves they can hire someone cheaper, younger, more compliant. They'll think the hard work is done, that maintaining is easier than building. They always do. He'd reached across the table then, his hand covering mine. This clause is my gift to you, Natalie. You've given your life to Halcyon. If they ever betray that sacrifice, if they ever try to cut you out right before you receive what you've earned, they'll discover that they don't own what they think they own. The entire encryption codebase, I'd whispered, finally understanding the full scope. Every algorithm, every protocol, every security measure that makes Halcyon valuable. It's all tied to your work product, and your work product is only theirs as long as they honor their obligation to you. He'd smiled then, a fierce expression that reminded me why he'd been such a successful founder. The beauty is, they can't remove the clause now. It's baked into the foundation documents. Any attempt to modify it would require your consent, which would alert you to its existence. I'd left that dinner in a daze, the folder burning in my laptop bag. For years, I'd almost forgotten about it, dismissed it as Ethan's paranoid farewell gift. Even after his death, when his predictions about management changes came true, I'd still believed in the company's fundamental decency. Now, standing in my apartment with termination papers in hand, I pulled out that same folder from my safe. The pages had yellowed slightly, but the words remained sharp as ever. Subsection 47B, paragraph 3, clear as day. In the event of termination within 72 hours of annual bonus disbursement date, all intellectual property assignments from employee shall automatically revert to employee, effective immediately upon non-payment. Ethan had even included a handwritten note paperclipped to the back, Natalie. They'll call you disloyal when this activates. Remember, loyalty is a two-way street. They close their lane first. Use what I've given you to build something better, something worthy of your talents, E. I traced his signature with my finger. He'd known. Somehow, 10 years ago, he'd seen this exact moment coming. The IPO timing, the greed, the betrayal, all of it. My phone buzzed with a text from Jennifer Park. Just heard. This is insane. Are you okay? No. I wasn't okay. I was something better. I was prepared. Because Ethan Cross hadn't just left me a poison pill. He'd left me a nuclear option, wrapped in legalese so beautiful that Victoria's lawyers wouldn't see it coming until the mushroom cloud was already rising. 41 hours until detonation, and counting, Victoria Lane. Even her name sounded like money old money, the kind that came with trust funds and boarding schools and summers in the Hamptons. I'd researched her thoroughly after she'd married Daniel 2 years ago. The way you'd research a new virus threatening your system. Know your enemy. Sun Tzu would say, though I doubt he'd ever faced an enemy who wore Louboutins to server room inspections. She came from the Lane family of Lane Capital, 3 generations of investment bankers who'd turned ruthlessness into an art form. Her grandfather had made his fortune shorting companies during the Depression. Her father had perfected the hostile takeover in the 80s. And Victoria. She'd inherited their predator instincts, but wrapped them in a veneer of Silicon Valley progressivism. The first time I met her was at the company holiday party. 3 months after the wedding, she'd swept in wearing a dress that cost more than most employees' monthly salaries, Daniel trailing behind her like an accessory. She'd made a beeline for me, the only other woman in senior leadership. "You must be Natalie," she'd said, her handshake firm but her smile never reaching her eyes. "Daniel tells me you're the technical genius behind our success." Our success. She'd been married to the CEO for 90 days, and already it was our success. "I write code," I'd replied simply. "Don't be modest," she'd laughed, that tinkling sound rich people perfect at finishing schools. "I've been reviewing the organization charts. It's fascinating how much of our infrastructure depends on your work." Depends. Present tense. Like I was already a liability to be managed rather than an asset to be valued. Within 6 months, she'd installed herself as strategic advisor, a title that meant nothing and everything. She started attending board meetings, executive sessions, even technical reviews, where she'd nod knowingly while understanding nothing. She'd ask questions designed to sound intelligent to other non-technical people. "How does this align with our blockchain strategy?" Or, "Can we leverage AI to optimize this?" But her real talent was manipulation. She had this way of making you feel like you were failing her personally when things went wrong, when our deployment timeline slipped by a week due to a security patch I'd insisted on. She'd pulled me aside with concern dripping from her voice. "Natalie, I'm worried about you. This perfectionism, it's holding the team back. Maybe you need some support. Someone to share the load." Share the load meant hiring her Stanford MBA friend as technical operations consultant at $300,000 a year. He lasted 4 months before quitting in frustration when he realized he couldn't Google his way through actual system architecture. Victoria's true nature revealed itself during the IPO preparation. She'd inserted herself as head of the IPO committee, claiming her family's financial background made her uniquely qualified. She hired investment bankers from her father's firm. She brought in valuation experts who'd worked on her family's portfolio companies. Every meeting became a performance where she could showcase her vision for Halcyon's future. That vision, I discovered, involved reducing engineering costs by 40% post-IPO. I'd found the draft proposal on a shared drive she didn't know I had access to. Outsource development to offshore teams. Replace senior engineers with recent bootcamp graduates. Optimize human capital allocation, the document called it. Translation fire. Everyone who'd built the company and replaced them with cheaper alternatives. My name had been highlighted in yellow with a note, redundant post-IPO, knowledge transfer critical, timeline T-2 days from IPO launch. She'd planned this. My termination wasn't impulsive, it was calculated. Fire me right before the bonus payout. Save the company $98,000 and remove the last person who could challenge her narrative about who really built Halcyon. The media loved her. Victoria Lane Morrison, the power behind Halcyon's throne, read one TechCrunch headline. She gave interviews about breaking glass ceilings, about bringing financial discipline to tech innovation, about her journey from investment banking to tech leadership. She spoke at women in tech conferences. Despite never writing a line of code, she was building a brand on the foundation I'd laid. But Victoria had one fatal flaw she believed her own press. She thought that because she could read a P&L statement, she understood the business. She thought that because she'd hired consultants to audit our code, she understood our technology. She thought that because she'd married the CEO and installed her allies, she controlled the company. She didn't understand that Halcyon wasn't built on spreadsheets and PowerPoints. It was built on code. My code. Code that was so deeply integrated into every system, every process, every product, that removing it would be like trying to extract your nervous system while keeping your body alive. Tomorrow, she'd probably announce my replacement some eager young engineer who'd work for half my salary and a fancy title. She'd spin my termination as bringing fresh perspectives or preparing for our next phase of growth. The board would nod along, trusting her financial projections and market analyses. I wondered if she'd already picked out my office. It had the best view of the Seattle skyline, earned after 17 years of basement offices and converted storage rooms. She'd probably turn it into a wellness room or a phone booth for confidential calls about her next strategic vision. Let her have the office. Let her have the title, the credit, the spotlight she craved so desperately. In 37 hours, she'd discover that she'd optimized herself out of a company. Because Victoria Lane Morrison, with all her money and connections and MBA strategies, had made one critical error. She'd confused ownership with control. She owned the narrative, the media cycle, the board's attention, but I controlled the code, and in technology, code is everything. She thought she was playing chess while I was playing checkers. The truth was, I wasn't playing at all. I'd already won. Ethan had made sure of that 10 years ago. Victoria just didn't know she was already in checkmate. The monitors in my home office cast blue shadows across the walls as I initiated my surveillance system. 3 screens came alive with cascading data stock tickers, internal Halcyon communications scraped from public channels, social media mentions, news aggregators. In the center screen, a simple countdown timer ticked away, 47, 23, 41 remaining. I'd built this monitoring setup years ago, originally to track system health during critical deployments. Now it would track a different kind of system failure, the slow-motion collapse of Victoria's perfect IPO. The USB drive I'd left in my desk drawer was a piece of theater, carefully placed where security would find it during their sweep. Empty, of course, but formatted with traces of encryption markers that would send their forensics team into a panic. They'd spend hours trying to crack nothing, convinced I'd stolen something. Meanwhile, the real backup, every line of code, every system document, every security protocol sat in my biometric vault, a custom encrypted storage system that required my retinal scan, fingerprint, and voice pattern to access. I'd learned paranoia from the best. Ethan had taught me that backups were like promises, worthless unless you could enforce them. My phone buzzed. Jennifer again. "Security is tearing apart your office. What the hell is going on?" I typed back, "Tell them to check the top drawer. They'll find what they're looking for." 3 dots appeared and disappeared several times before her response. "Natalie, what did you do?" "Nothing," I replied truthfully. Yet, the beauty of Ethan's clause was its automatic execution. I didn't need to take any action, file any paperwork, or send any threats. The moment my bonus payment failed to process at 9 a.m. in 47 hours, the ownership would revert. Legal, clean, irreversible. I pulled up Halcyon's GitHub repository on one screen. I still had read access for another 13 minutes before they remembered to revoke it. My code was everywhere, woven through the system like DNA. The encryption module mine, the authentication system mine, the API gateway that handled millions of requests per second mine, the proprietary compression algorithm that made our data transfer 70% more efficient than competitors' mine. 17 years of innovation, about to vanish from their control. An email notification popped up from HR. Final employment verification. They wanted me to sign an NDA and non-compete in exchange for 2 weeks severance. I almost laughed. They were trying to buy my silence for less than what I made in a month. I archived it without responding. Let them wonder. The timer read 46:45:22 when I noticed unusual activity on the company's public repository. They were already trying to fork the codebase, creating copies they could control. Smart, but ultimately futile. The code was worthless without the encryption keys, and those existed only in my biometric vault. Even if they had the code, they couldn't compile it into anything functional. My personal laptop chimed with an encrypted message from Marcus Huang. "They're bringing in an outside firm to audit the code. Someplace called Nexus Security. They're freaking out about that USB." Nexus Security. I knew them competent but conventional. They'd find the USB was empty within an hour, but by then the paranoia would have spread. They'd assume I'd hidden something elsewhere, start looking for backdoors that didn't exist, waste precious time hunting ghosts. I opened my filing cabinet and pulled out a leather journal, handwritten notes from every major system I'd built. Not documentation they could use, but proof of creation, dated and detailed. My insurance policy. Each page showed the evolution of ideas, the problems solved, the innovations that made Halcyon worth $320 million. The countdown timer passed 46 hours. In Seattle's financial district, bankers were probably reviewing final IPO documents, unaware that the company's entire technical infrastructure was built on a foundation about to shift. I'd already incorporated my new company, Prometheus Systems. The paperwork had been filed 6 months ago. Sitting dormant, waiting. I'd even recruited quietly 3 former Halcyon engineers who'd left over the years, disgusted by Victoria's management. They were ready to start the moment I gave the word. The irony was delicious. Victoria thought she was launching Halcyon into the stratosphere with this IPO. Instead, she'd be remembered as the executive who lost hundreds of millions in value through one vindictive termination. My monitoring system flagged a new article, "Halcyon Technologies Streamlines Leadership Ahead of IPO." Victoria had already given a statement about optimizing their technical team for post-IPO growth. She'd even mentioned bringing in fresh perspectives to modernize their architecture. Modernize my architecture. The architecture that had 0 critical failures in 5 years, that processed billions of transactions, that had never been successfully breached. I saved the article, evidence for later, when investigators would ask how everything went so wrong. The timer ticked down 45:33 teens. I stood and walked to my window, looking out at Seattle's skyline. Halcyon's office was 12 blocks away, lights still burning on the executive floor. Were they celebrating planning my replacement? Counting their IPO millions? Let them count. In 45 hours, they'd discover that they'd fired the person who literally owned their product. The contracts were clear. The law was settled. and Ethan's beautiful trap was about to spring. I returned to my desk and opened a new document, Prometheus Systems Revolutionary Encryption for the Next Generation. My next company's business plan. Built on code that would soon be entirely mine. The countdown continued its relentless march to 9:43. Victoria thought she'd ended my story at Halcyon. She had no idea she'd just started my resurrection. The first crack appeared at 7:43 a.m. Pacific Time, 36 hours into the countdown. Bloomberg picked it up first. Questions arise about Halcyon Technologies' personnel changes before IPO. A minor story, buried in the tech section, but I watched it spread across my monitors like ink and water. The reporter had done her homework. She'd noticed the unusual timing of my termination, cross-referenced it with SEC filings that listed me as key personnel just 2 weeks ago, and started asking uncomfortable questions. Why would a company fire its senior systems architect 48 hours before a major IPO? What did they know that investors didn't? By 9 a.m., the story had jumped to Reddit's technology and investing subreddits. Amateur detectives were dissecting Halcyon's public GitHub commits, noticing that 90% of critical updates had my username attached. Someone found my conference presentations from the past 5 years, highlighting how I'd essentially been the face of Halcyon's technical innovation. "This is insane," one commenter wrote. She built their entire encryption framework. Check her Black Hat presentation from 2023. She literally explains how their proprietary system works, and they fired her 2 days before IPO. My phone hadn't stopped buzzing. Recruiters who'd been courting me for years smelled blood in the water. 3 competitors had already reached out with offers. Microsoft wanted to talk. Amazon was very interested in exploring opportunities. I ignored them all. I had bigger plans than becoming another corporate architect. At 11:20 a.m., TechCrunch published a deeper dive. Inside Halcyon's mysterious executive shakeup. They'd somehow gotten hold of an internal email probably leaked by someone on my old team showing Victoria's announcement of my restructuring. The language was corporate cold, thanking me for my contributions while emphasizing the need for new technical leadership aligned with post-IPO objectives. The market started to notice. Halcyon's private valuation, whispered about in venture capital circles, began showing cracks. One unnamed investor told Reuters they were reassessing their position, given the unexpected personnel changes. Then came the earthquake disguised as a tweet. James Walsh, the legendary tech investor who'd backed 3 unicorns, posted at 1:15 p.m. Due diligence tip. When a company fires the person who built their core technology 48 hours before IPO, run fast, run far. It went viral within an hour. 15,000 retweets. CNBC picked it up for their afternoon segment. The hashtag #Halcyon Red Flags started trending. I watched Victoria's damage control attempt in real time through leaked Slack messages Marcus was forwarding me. Emergency meetings were called. The PR firm was in crisis mode. Victoria herself was drafting a response, insisting my termination was part of a planned transition that had been in motion for months. Lies stacked on lies, each one creating more questions. At 3:30 p.m., the Wall Street Journal delivered the kill shot. Halcyon Technologies' IPO in jeopardy as key personnel clause may be violated. Someone, a beautiful, anonymous someone, had leaked the IPO prospectus detail about the key personnel continuity clause. It stated that any material changes to technical leadership within 72 hours of the IPO could allow underwriters to withdraw. My name was specifically listed as essential personnel whose departure would constitute a material change. The article quoted an unnamed source familiar with the matter. The termination of Ms. Rhodes appears to directly violate the continuity requirements agreed upon with underwriters. This could give Goldman Sachs grounds to pull out of the deal entirely. My monitoring system showed Victoria's response in real time, a flurry of emails to Goldman Sachs, attempts to schedule emergency calls with the SEC, frantic messages to board members. The subject lines grew increasingly desperate. Urgent clarification needed. Response required. WSJ article. Emergency board meeting tonight. At 5:45 p.m., someone leaked an internal memo from Daniel Morrison, the CEO, to all staff. He was flying back from Europe immediately. The memo tried to project calm. assuring employees that the IPO was proceeding as planned and that recent speculation in the media was unfounded and unfortunate. But employees weren't buying it. My LinkedIn inbox filled with messages from former colleagues. The smart ones were already updating their resumes. Jennifer Park sent a single line. The whole engineering floor is in chaos. 3 people just quit. The Bloomberg terminal on my center screen showed something beautiful. Institutional investors were making quiet inquiries about pulling out of the IPO allocation. The $320 million valuation was becoming a fantasy in real time. As night fell over Seattle, I opened a bottle of wine, a good Malbec I'd been saving for a special occasion. 28 hours remained on my countdown timer, but the avalanche had already started. No amount of damage control could stop gravity. My phone rang, unknown number, but I recognized the 212 area code. New York. Probably a reporter or an investor fishing for information. I let it go to voicemail and took another sip of wine. Outside my window, the city sparkled with indifferent beauty. Somewhere in those lights, Victoria was discovering that her perfect narrative was unraveling. She'd wanted to be the woman who launched a unicorn. Instead, she'd be the executive who killed a $320 million IPO with one vindictive decision. The irony was that if she'd just let me collect my bonus and leave quietly, none of this would have happened. The IPO would have proceeded. The code would have remained theirs, and I would have walked away with my $98,000 and a standard severance package. But Victoria had to win completely. She had to humiliate me, to erase me from Halcyon's story right before the triumph. She'd pulled the trigger on what she thought was a kill shot. She just hadn't realized the gun was pointing at her own head. 27 hours, 43 minutes remaining. The first cracks had become fissures. Soon, they'd be canyons. The call came at 6:22 a.m., 18 hours before the countdown reached 0. Victoria's personal number lighting up my phone screen like a distress signal. I let it ring 4 times before answering. Natalie. Her voice had lost its polished edge, replaced by something raw and desperate. We need to talk. We're talking, I said, keeping my tone neutral. In person, please. I can send a car. No. Silence stretched between us. I could hear her breathing, rapid and shallow. When she spoke again, the words tumbled out in a rush. This is insane. You're destroying everything over a bonus. We can work this out. I'll authorize the payment right now. $98,000 plus an additional severance package. $200,000 total. Just stop whatever you're doing. I'm not doing anything, Victoria. Don't play games. Her composure cracked completely. The Journal, TechCrunch, that investor tweet, I know you're behind this. You're trying to sabotage the IPO out of spite. I actually laughed. You think I called the Wall Street Journal, Victoria? I haven't spoken to a single reporter. They're just doing their job asking why a company would fire essential personnel before an IPO. That's not sabotage. That's journalism. The board is furious, she continued, as if I hadn't spoken. Goldman Sachs is threatening to pull out. We've lost 30% of our institutional investors overnight. Daniel is... She caught herself, but I could fill in the blanks. Daniel was probably discovering what happened when you let your wife play CEO. None of that is my problem anymore, I said. You made sure of that yesterday morning. Come back. The words came out strangled. Full reinstatement. Your bonus, your position, everything. I'll even give you a promotion. CTO. You should have been CTO years ago. She was right about that last part, but it was far too late for should-haves. Read the termination agreement your lawyer sent, I said calmly. Section 12, paragraph 4. Any offer of reinstatement must be approved by the board and submitted in writing within 24 hours of termination. It's been 36 hours. Victoria, legally, I couldn't come back even if I wanted to. We'll find a way around. No. More silence. I could practically hear her mind racing, trying to find another angle, another pressure point. What do you want? She finally asked. Everyone wants something. Name your price. I thought about Ethan's letter, his prediction that this moment would come, the desperate bargaining of someone who'd just realized they'd cut the wrong wire on a bomb. I wanted to build great technology, I said. I wanted to mentor talented engineers. I wanted to see the company I helped create succeed. But you took that away from me. Remember effective immediately. This is about ego. Her voice rose. You're going to destroy a $320 million company because your feelings were hurt. No, Victoria, I'm not destroying anything. I'm just letting contracts execute as written. You should have read the founding documents more carefully. What are you talking about? I stayed silent. Let her figure it out. The lawyers would find subsection 47B eventually, probably within the next few hours, as they desperately searched for why their investors were panicking. The FBI will investigate, she threatened. Corporate sabotage, theft of trade secrets. Call them, I interrupted. Please, I'd love to explain to federal investigators how you terminated me to avoid paying a contractually obligated bonus. I'm sure they'd find the timing fascinating. Her breathing had become ragged. You vindictive bitch! There it was, the real Victoria. Stripped of her corporate polish and PR-friendly feminism, just another entitled heir who'd never been told no. I need to go, I said. Good luck with the IPO. Wait. The code, there's something wrong with the repositories. The encryption keys don't work. The backup systems are failing. Everything is corrupted. That's impossible, I said truthfully. I haven't touched any company systems since you revoked my access. Then explain why nothing compiles our entire codebase is useless. I smiled. Though she couldn't see it, they'd discovered the first layer of the problem. Without my biometric authentication updating the rotating encryption seeds every 72 hours. The development environment had locked itself. Not my doing, just a security feature I'd implemented 3 years ago to prevent code theft. I'd been the only one maintaining the authentication cycle. Sounds like you need a senior systems architect, I said. Oh, wait. Natalie, please. I hung up. My monitors showed the cascade effect in real time. Halcyon's stock futures traded privately among institutional investors had dropped 43%. Business Insider had just published Breaking Halcyon Technologies CTO Position Offered to Terminated Employee in Desperate IPO Save Attempt. Someone was leaking everything. Maybe Marcus. Maybe Jennifer. Maybe one of the board members trying to position themselves for the aftermath. It didn't matter. The avalanche had reached terminal velocity. An email popped up from Goldman Sachs' senior underwriter, CC'd to what looked like half of Wall Street, pending resolution of personnel and technical issues. Goldman Sachs is suspending all IPO activities for Halcyon Technologies effective immediately. 12 hours remaining on my countdown, but it was already over. My phone rang again. Daniel Morrison this time. Then a board member. Then a number I recognized as Halcyon's general counsel. I turned the phone off entirely. On my center monitor, the timer continued its relentless countdown 11:48:22. Victoria had wanted to erase me from Halcyon's story. Instead, she'd ensured I'd be the only part anyone remembered the architect whose departure brought down a $320 million house of cards. I opened my laptop and began drafting the press release for Prometheus Systems. In 12 hours, I'd own every piece of meaningful code Halcyon had. Time to build something better. Something without Victoria Lane. The countdown reached 0 at 9 a.m. Pacific time on a gray Thursday morning. I watched it happen from my home office. 3 monitors displaying the final seconds like a NASA launch sequence in reverse. 00, 03, 00, 0, 02, 00, 01, 0. No fanfare, no alarms, just a simple automated process executing exactly as programmed. Across the city, in Halcyon's legal department, an authentication certificate expired. A ownership registry updated. A chain of digital signatures validated themselves against the blockchain timestamp I'd established years ago as a safeguard. The intellectual property rights to 237 million lines of code, the entire cardiovascular system of Halcyon Technologies transferred to my name. I opened the biometric vault and downloaded the documentation I'd need for the next phase. Proof of creation, patent filings, Git commit histories showing my authorship. Everything time-stamped, notarized, indisputable. My phone, turned back on for this moment, exploded with notifications. The first call was from Halcyon's general counsel. I answered. Ms. Rhodes. His voice was carefully controlled. We've just received notification from the IP registry. There seems to be some kind of error. It's not an error. The system shows you as the sole owner of our core technology assets. That's correct. A long pause. That's impossible. You signed assignment agreements, which became void when the company failed to pay my contractual bonus within the specified time frame. Section 47B, subsection 3 of the founding documents. I assume you found it by now. This is theft. No, I interrupted. It's contract law. Written by Ethan Cross. Notarized by 3 witnesses. Filed with the state of Delaware 10 years ago. You can have your team verify the authenticity. I'll wait. I didn't have to wait long. Within an hour, the news broke everywhere simultaneously. Halcyon Technologies loses core IP rights in unprecedented contract activation. The Wall Street Journal ran the numbers without the proprietary code. Halcyon's valuation dropped from $320 million to essentially zero. They were now a shell company with nice offices and rapidly departing talent. Goldman Sachs didn't just suspend the IPO. They terminated it entirely, triggering penalty clauses that would cost Halcyon millions they no longer had. By noon, trading of Halcyon's private shares had stopped entirely. Nobody wanted to buy equity in a company that no longer owned its product. Victoria made one last attempt, arriving at my apartment at 2 p.m. with a security detail she probably couldn't afford anymore. I watched her through my doorbell camera makeup smeared, designer suit wrinkled, the polish completely gone. "I know you're in there," she said to the camera. "We can still fix this, please." I pressed the intercom button. "There's nothing to fix. Victoria, you wanted me gone. I'm gone. You've destroyed hundreds of jobs. All those engineers, the support staff, they're innocent." She was right about that, which is why I'd already sent offer letters to 12 key engineers, guaranteeing them positions at Prometheus Systems with 20% salary increases. The good ones would land on their feet. They always did. "You destroyed those jobs when you put your ego above the company," I said. "I just declined to save you from yourself." She stood there for another 5 minutes, alternating between threats and pleas, before her security finally guided her away. The last I saw of Victoria Lane Morrison was her being helped into a black SUV, her empire in ruins behind her. By evening, the tech world had divided into camps. Some called me a hero, a developer who'd fought back against corporate exploitation. Others branded me a villain who'd destroyed a company out of spite. The truth, as always, was simpler and more complex. I was just an engineer who'd been given a gift by a dying founder and used it exactly as he'd intended. Marcus texted me at 8:43 p.m. "The office is empty. Everyone's gone. Even the security guards left." I saved the message, then sent him an offer letter for Prometheus Systems, CTO position, the job I should have had years ago. Now his, if he wanted it. At midnight, I stood at my window with the last of the Malbec, looking out at Seattle's glittering skyline. Somewhere in those lights, Victoria was probably meeting with lawyers, trying to find some way to reverse the irreversible. Daniel was likely updating his resume. The board was certainly pointing fingers, assigning blame, pretending they hadn't ignored every warning sign. And me, I was finally free. Free to build without bureaucracy. Free to innovate without interference. Free to create something extraordinary without Victoria Lane's shadow darkening every achievement. I raised my glass to the city lights, to Ethan's memory, to the beautiful complexity of contract law. "Sometimes," I said to the empty room, thinking of Ethan's last words to me, "silence really is the deepest cut." The next morning, I filed the incorporation papers for Prometheus Systems, using my newly acquired IP as founding assets. Within a week, I had funding offers from 3 major VCs. Within a month, half of Halcyon's engineering team had joined me. Victoria's IPO never happened. Halcyon Technologies dissolved 6 months later. A cautionary tale taught in business schools about the importance of reading the fine print and treating your architects with respect. And that USB drive I'd left in my desk, it really was empty. Just a piece of plastic that cost $5 and sparked a paranoia worth $320 million. Sometimes the best revenge isn't about what you do. It's about what you let happen when gravity takes over. Thank you so much for listening to this story of corporate revenge and poetic justice. I'd love to know where you're listening from. Drop a comment below, and let's connect. If you enjoyed this tale of how one architect's silence brought down a tech empire, please subscribe to the channel and share your thoughts. Have you ever witnessed or experienced workplace betrayal that backfired spectacularly? Let me know in the comments. Your stories and perspectives make this community amazing.